Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. Today's guest is Lila Bennett, the Executive Director to the Journey to Recovery Community Center. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
You've been on the show before, but it was with a previous title, but You are now the Executive Director of the Recovery Center.
Yes.
And this chapter of our history is unfortunate, but you and people like you are in big demand.
Definitely. I think that recovery is kind of on the crux of being on the front lines of healthcare right now. I think that it's starting to be taken seriously that recovery and recovery services need to work hand in hand with other medical interventions for addictions.
So when we talk about addictions, because a lot of people will say drug and alcohol addiction. Well, in a sense, isn't drug and alcohol is a drug, right?
Yeah, it is. So first, I want to back up and just say quickly what Journey to Recovery Community Center is and does. So we are a nonprofit that's based in Newport, and we are a group of people who are every single staff member at Journey to Recovery is someone who has shared or lived experience. So that means that we've either struggled with addiction of some kind ourselves or had family members, and so it's touched our lives, and we've had to come through and learn the coping mechanisms to better our own lives, and that's why we have the skills alongside much training to be able to support people who are also looking to change their lives. So back to drugs and alcohol, we do split up the distinction because sometimes alcohol is overlooked as a problematic substance, and so we talk about alcohol separately because of the social acceptance of it. And, it's socially acceptable to have a drink or two, and that it's socially acceptable kind of to we make jokes all the time, especially during the pandemic. It was like, oh my gosh, day drinking. Like, how are we going to get through the day being home all day all together? And so alcoholism is pervasive. It touches really almost every family in the United States. We have more deaths due to alcohol than we do to opioid overdose, but we don't really talk about that very much. Opioids are a tremendous problem that's wrecking lives and communities. So, we do try to be able to tell the stories, in parallel, but also separately because they affect people and communities differently. And they all need to be highlighted.
Right. Over the years, I've had quite a number of recovering and sometimes backsliding opiate addicts come on my show, and I've had panels. I've had them just come on together, and I've asked them, why do you want to do this? Because there's a danger of going, some people would have a perceived danger of going public because you are telling the world that you are an addict. Mm-hmm. But most of the addicts I've talked to, they don't want this for themselves, and they don't want it for somebody else. And I have found that the people who've come on my show, the ones who are seeking recovery or who are working at it, that they're bluntly honest about the struggles that they face. What I find sometimes, I sometimes don't feel that the family members are quite as accepting of it as the addicts are. Like, they try to find excuses for the addicts, and while I find the addicts, will point the finger of blame right at the person looking at them in the mirror.
Yes. So, well, that's a really great point. So, family members play a huge part in recovery.
Right.
You know, as a family member myself, that's really how I found myself in this world. Was I was an enabler for a long time, and I made a lot of excuses for people in my life about their about the substances they were using, and sort of blame myself. And I think that family members, it's very confusing. You just don't understand what's really going on, and there's layers to it. And you know, there's also stigma, and there's judging. You know, you wonder why your family member can't just pull it together. You know, just get a grip. And then on the other side you blame yourself. And a lot of times when people are active in their addiction, they cannot look at themselves. Like, they don't have coping skills at that time. And so it's really easy to just blame the person closest to them for everything that's happening to them. And so it creates like many unhealthy dynamics. And I know that for me, like, part of why I'm so interested in this work is because recovery has to do with responsibility of self. So that's like the person struggling with the substance needs to learn how to take responsibility for their own actions, and their family members also need to learn how to understand what's going on and what is their part and what isn't their part. And actually, Amber Robbins, who is our director of our Moms in Recovery program right now, is just finishing a training where we are going to be offering family support groups every single week. There's so many family members who need the help to understand. There's concepts like codependency, where when somebody's struggling with an addiction, oftentimes they find themselves in a really helpless place. They're needing to be rescued. They're kind of in this victim behavior. Why is everything happening to me? I can't deal with it. I'm going to use, or I'm going to drink, and then their loved ones kind of swoop in and they're like, what can I do to help? How can I? And it creates this like really, push-pull, need dynamic that's hurtful to everyone. And I think that recovery has to do with coping, learning how to cope, learning how to look at the things. Like, the reality is life is going to kick all of us straight in the face a lot of times, and learning how to take it and be strong and learn about resilience and how to not just kind of crumble and cave into comfort, like blanket comforts that aren't healthy. And then also, like what you were saying about people who maybe relapse, and they go backwards. Like, our community and our culture, one of the messages that we really do need to work on is that relapse is very often a part of recovery. Like, you're not just going to suddenly just boom, explode into this strong, resilient person. Like, it's like anything, it's baby steps, and sometimes you're going to fall down a little. And we all need to be able to embrace somebody on their path and keep supporting them as they get stronger and stronger, and relapse becomes farther and farther between, and life begins to stabilize.
You were saying most of us, I think you would agree, most of us have some person or people in our lives who are struggling with addiction. Now, I'm fortunate that our immediate family does not have any real forms of addiction. Now, with that said, in my extended family, I have a number of people who are struggling, and there's they've some have done well, others not so well. I even lost a cousin years ago, out of state, when he was in recovery. And I hear this quite a bit, is sometimes you don't get a second chance at recovery, because he went a year without using, did all the right things, and then he, I guess you call him a speedball, heroin and cocaine, and he just, you know,
Well, and
he
his
took,
body.
yeah, he took the same amount as he would do when
Right.
he was using,
Right.
but it came back and bit him and killed him. So
Right.
so yeah, I've been touched by it as well. I will say I think what you're doing is great, and I think coming on here is good because, and I actually welcome you if you ever have people who really want to talk about being in recovery to come on, because I've done that in the past. And the most interesting conversation I had was I was down at Vista, and somebody came up to me and said that they were an active user of opiates. They're addicts, but they said watching the shows in which other people are working through it gave them hope that they too could find the strength someday.
So that's exactly what we do at the Recovery Center. Is like we are real. Like we get real with every single person that walks through that door. Like, you know, we talk about, you know, we do share our stories, and we do offer hope, and we also offer kind of like a roadmap for how someone can improve their life, you know, in the way that works for them. We were just talking yesterday. So one thing that we do at the Recovery Center that's really important to this area is we are on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have pagers, and we have a schedule, and there is someone who is available for the police to call and for the emergency room to call. And we do get called by the police in the emergency room when someone has overdosed or drank too much, you know, or is in like a substance use crisis. And so we'll often get called to the emergency room to go and speak to the person, offer our services, help navigate rehab. If they want to go to rehab, we make sure that we get them in and like help them with their transportation and all of that stuff. And you know, we were just talking yesterday. A staff member, Everett, is this wonderful human being who has overcome so much in his life. You know, he wouldn't mind me sharing, you know, that he overcame poverty and, you know, a lot of addiction, a lot of pills, a lot of heroin, and, you know, where he got to a place in his own life where, you know, he got into a fight after drinking and shooting heroin, and he ended up in jail wondering if he had just killed someone. And when Everett goes to the emergency room and he meets with someone who has just overdosed, and he shares his story, it brings a level of equality to the conversation, that like we aren't better. You know, we've been down at our own bottoms, whatever they are, you know, and it offers that hope, and it helps people realize that like we're not judging them, we're not there to tell them what to do, we're there to like offer support and say like your life actually matters to you, your life matters to me, and your life matters to the world, and there's ways for us to make like really good plans to help you be okay. And being able to have the opportunity to work with the nurses and the police to offer that compassion and the understanding of it, you know, is really helping, because sometimes people do wind up in the emergency room more than once. And when you're a really busy nurse in a small emergency room that doesn't have a lot of beds, and you have the same person over and over, it can be a little frustrating. And so we're there to be the spokesperson and say, hey, you know what? I know it's frustrating for you, but this person is on this path, and we're helping, and like we're seeing our teams are expanding, like our collaboration is expanding, and the more that nurses and police understand, you know, the struggles of what people might be going through, the more we're all able to work together and like actually get people to the next step for them. And we're seeing more success. Like we're having people go from the emergency room to rehab, out of rehab, back into our services where they can do outpatient with us. And get jobs, cars, and move forward in their lives.
And what's interesting is people have a stereotypical view, or many people do, of what an addict looks like.
Yes.
And I'm going to tell you from experience, your stereotypical views probably are not always correct, because there are people, very functional addicts who struggle every single day, who even use every single day, and they're people that you might not think are, because they do lead otherwise, quote, normal lives.
That's really great segue into a goal that I have as executive director of the Recovery Center. So this is kind of new, but so for people who don't know, the Recovery Center just moved. We moved to just across the street from the hospital, and we're in the Birchwood Medical building now.
The old the Dr. Wiley building.
That's right. And we're there. We're right across from the hospital, which is fantastic, because the amount of work that we do in the emergency room, we're right there. And it just makes it more seamless. The Recovery Center used to be down on 3rd Street, and, it was like slightly triggering sometimes for people to go there. There's more drug use in that neighborhood. Being up at the hospital, it's like kind of clean. It's on the bus route. It's out of the way. And not only that, what's important to me is, especially from this pandemic, we have nurses and doctors and healthcare providers who are struggling with substance use. The amount of pressure on our healthcare providers to support our community members who are struggling without support themselves leads some of them to be drinking too much, going down all kinds of unhealthy roads. And so one of my goals, at being not only right next door to the hospital, but just running the center in general, is to provide a safe place for healthcare providers to get the support that they need, because we don't talk about that, and it's highly stigmatized. How could you possibly be a nurse who drinks too much? Right? But it happens all the time, because our nurses are, so much is expected of our nurses and doctors, and there's nothing for them. And so being there, they can discreetly come and see us. And it's definitely something that you will hear more about from Journey to Recovery, the stigma around healthcare workers and substance use.
Well, it's too bad that the fellow I'm thinking about has moved away, and I won't say his name, but a lot of people might remember who this was. One of the most, I think he was one of the most esteemed doctors, one of the most competent doctors to ever work at North Country. He was in the early days of the use of opiates, and he became an addict, ended up losing his medical license. Thus, he went into the heroin trade, and that's the extreme story. But years later, he's picked up the pieces, and I've told him, I said, can I tell your story? And he says, I really appreciate, because I actually admire him. I think, well, how can you admire somebody who took that path? No, I admire him for what he's done with his life. But he felt that was a different chapter, that he owns it, but he didn't want to go public with it.
I think that is not an uncommon story.
Right. And I respect it.
And that's around us every single day.
Right.
There's professional, intelligent, wonderful, compassionate human beings right here all around us who are suffering, and carrying the shame of it. And so that's what we do at Journey to Recovery, is we talk about those deeper driving factors, the shame, people get into. So the dirty little secret about addiction, right, is that no one in the world ever plans on becoming an alcoholic or an addict. Something drove them to there. It's pain, it's shame, it's things in their lives that they just really couldn't manage. And all of a sudden you're drinking every day, and you don't have a handle on yourself and you feel terrible every day, and it's a terrible vicious cycle that you can't seem to get out of, and then you add cultural stigma on top of it, and then you add New England stigma on top of that we are all very stubborn and prideful here, and even though we would all help our neighbors without thinking twice, asking for help is a sign of weakness. And so, Journey to Recovery takes each person that comes in the door and says, let's just take a deeper, careful look at how this even began. Because addiction has to do with connection and coping skills. And when you start to unravel all of those pieces, that's when life really begins to improve.
And then you see some families, it's almost like the coping skills are actually inherited sometimes from, right up the line, because having lived here, you can see the same.
Right.
It's like, I grew up in a family where I think my parents had the same liquor bottle our entire years growing up. So, I did not grow up with even alcohol in the house. Right. Now, I do like a beer or two. Mm-hmm. But so if you're growing up where you need a substance every time, and I think we were talking with the producer of the show, Todd Pronto, beforehand, and we were saying, he was talking to somebody who was a recovering heroin user. He says, wow, he says, I'm glad I'm a recovering heroin user and not a recovering alcoholic. And it was a good observation. He says, at least as a recovering heroin addict, you're probably not going to go to a kid's birthday party and be surrounded with alcohol, with heroin. But if you're a recovering alcoholic, alcohol is everywhere. I used to joke, I'm not against alcohol. As I said, I like one or two. But I used to joke that I wonder when I'm going to go to Sanders Village and see a beer tent. Well, I haven't seen that yet, but I went to Storyland, little kid's place. There's a beer tent. There's a beer garden there. And it's like, I like beer. I like sampling beer, but I don't need to go to a kid's park and have a beer. And if I do, I think I need help.
Yes. I think that it's really interesting, because that brings me to, that conversation with Todd was so powerful that, he was saying that how pervasive alcohol is. It's just around you all the time. And I think that's, at Journey to Recovery, one thing that we also do is talk about that recovery is different for every single person. And so, like, if you are a heroin addict, or if you're struggling with opioids and you do decide that, like getting Suboxone or methadone, which is MAT, medically assisted therapy, to help you get off opioids, like if that's helping you, like, stabilize your life, that is okay. Like, there's a lot of judgment and stigma around the different forms of recovery. Sometimes people need to get off of heroin, and they need to smoke pot for a little while to, like, stabilize their lives, learn how to take feelings, learn how to adjust to, like, the problem is, you start using drugs or alcohol because your life is really hard and you can't deal with it. And then if you stop and your life is still really hard, what are you going to do? And so we at Journey to Recovery really look at, like, the step down process. And, like, recovery cannot always be about abstinence. Like, it has to be about looking at the whole picture and helping each person find, like, truly their healthy path. That's not to say, like, we also know kind of when people want to manipulate us and get something that might not be healthy for them. But that's our professional job, is to really help push people, to their best.
And I think where you folks might come in is, like, with the people who've been on my show, who've talked about their struggles with addiction, they will say that it quickly becomes a lonely chapter of their lives because you've kind of pushed away your previous friends, as in the non-using friends. You've pushed them away years ago or months ago, and now once you stop, not only do you not want to hang out with the using friends, but they probably don't want to hang out with you anymore. Thus, then, you end up almost isolated.
Right.
And sometimes that forces you, at least you think it forces you to go back into using, so you have a group once again.
Yes, because especially the more we learn and the more we study the human brain, scientifically speaking, the brain is wired for connection and purpose and belonging and love. Like, we were made for those things. And so when we're lacking them, or when you've grown up in generational poverty, generational addiction, when you're stuck in a cycle of like complete survival, you're not even, those pathways aren't even existent, right? You're just like trying to create them in these other ways with substances, really. And so as that falls away, and then you're left with like, you still have to survive every day, especially up here, finding a job, keeping a job, getting to your job, all of that is like, takes all of your energy, when really your brain is like seeking these other pathways of like love, connection, belonging, purpose. And so learning how to get through that really hard time, like stopping using and being in that place of alone, is really one of the most difficult things anyone can ever go through in life. Like, because it is this sort of void where you're starting over.
Okay, we only, the show went extraordinarily fast, but I want you to come back on too.
Absolutely.
Because I think this is a very important topic. We have about 4 more minutes left. If somebody is listening and they think they need your services, how do they reach out?
Okay, so we have a new website. It's www.jtr-cc.org. Right. It's like kind of awkward, but you can find it. jtr-cc.org. Now, you can get on that website. There's quizzes, there's information. You can fiddle around and see if anything resonates with you or a loved one. And you can email us straight on the website. The emails go straight to my inbox, so I see every single one. Right. I will get back to anyone who has questions. It's confidential. We are really careful about that. You can call the center at 802-624-4156 anytime. You can also, we have a Facebook page, and we do encourage people to get on there and follow it. We put stuff on every day. There's links to all of our meetings, and everything is in person and over Zoom right now. So you can join a group by Zoom from home still. And all of that information is on our website, and we post right before every group. We post the link on Facebook. You can also message us on Facebook, and we check that Facebook page, all the messages all the time. So it's easy. We're very accessible.
Right. I'm a rose-colored glasses type of person. I really hope for the best. I really, because I happen to believe the world is filled with wonderful places. We are not a divided country. We are not a divided world, as much as the media says and such. But looking into the future, are you confident that we can wrangle in this monster called addiction?
I actually have a lot of hope for that, and this is why. And I know we're kind of running out of time, but currently we have the ears of many people in the federal government, because really everything comes down to funding, right? And so if we have the dollars behind us to talk about stigma and look at asking for help, turning that into a positive, not a negative, culturally, then yes, we do have we do have a fighting chance. And I think, we're also looking at other things like prevention, like getting into schools and being a lot more creative. That's another thing that we didn't talk about today, but we are working with our local high schools. We are reaching kids on their level with not like the dry don't do drugs stuff. Like we're talking to kids, young adults, in ways that resonate with them, that have to do with like, hey, what does success look like to you? And that's a lot of this forward motion, is like addiction and recovery is tied to purpose and belonging. And so the more that we can keep moving our culture in that direction and having the people who are asking for help be able to also speak in that language, the stronger we'll all be.
Right. One last question then is, are you seeing that, years of work, not you particularly, but this educating people about addiction and overcoming, it's been a few years now. Are you starting to see it bear fruit yet?
I think that yes, we are. We're seeing it work.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. It was great having you on, and I certainly want you on again because I think you have a great way of putting things, and I think this is a great topic that needs to be discussed. And I've done this for a few years, and I, even though as I said, directly, our family doesn't have addiction, but many families do. So I think people like you coming on and keeping it out in the spotlight really helps.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, and thank you for coming on.
Yeah.
And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.